Recording purposes, today is disease and its impact on humans. Right. And this is what I mentioned just now. I uploaded all the slides to the website. All right. And keep in mind that usually when GB appears on the screen and says something, most likely it's not correct. And it's our job to kind of figure out what he is saying wrong in class. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so let's start off here. We have Jibby. Jibby is standing up there, and next to him is a very strong-looking person, right? His name is Tommy. It's clear to us that probably Tommy works out a lot. Maybe he goes to the gym. Maybe he's in the army where he works out every day. Maybe he's a gym instructor. Who knows? But clearly he looks fit, strong, right? So let's take a read of what Jibby is trying to tell him. Tommy, take it from me. You are strong and fit, and all your blood tests came back good. You are healthy, my friend, right? Because that is what Tommy is asking him. Now, quick question, and of course, use the chat. Is being healthy only about physical, what you can see on the surface? Because what all GB and we can see is his muscles and whatnot, right? He looks like a strong guy. But if you were a doctor, would you say for 100, would you say with 100% certainty that Tommy is healthy? And the answer to that is no. What else other than the physical aspect of someone should be taken into consideration if a person is healthy? Anybody wants to take some guesses? What else other than the physical should we consider to name a person or to certify someone as healthy? Let me know on it. Well, when we are certifying if someone is healthy, we also have to consider their mental state. You ever hear the term mental health is important? That is because you could have a person looking real strong and fit, and he doing karate, and he real fit, but he mentally he may not be 100%. Maybe he's depressed, like seriously depressed, but you're not seeing it, but he's depressed. Maybe he has suicidal thoughts. But, you have all of these things we have to consider. It's called emotional health. Also, another category of classifying if someone is healthy is their social health. What is social health, right? Humans are social animals, which means we need to interact with other people. Have you ever met someone, like I'm sure there are people like that in school, right? Who don't talk to anybody. They stay away from everyone else. They usually call them loners, a loner, right? And that's actually not healthy. I mean, it's very important that you socialize with other people because that's how you find out what's going on around you. And of course, when you're going to the work environment, you have to interact with other people. You need to be socially healthy as well. So let's take a look. Let's summarize what I just said there. So mental illness, when you're trying to figure out if someone is healthy or not, you have to make sure they don't have any mental illnesses as well. Things like, and some of you all know this already, things like bipolar, depression, anxiety. Now, I'm a person, I tell you, well, upfront, I'm a person who suffers from really bad anxiety, right? So technically, I am not 100% healthy because my mental health is not 100%, right? Some people have eating disorders. The eating disorders could be two things. The person could be eating too much or too little bit. What do you call the condition when somebody eats too little bit of food? Like they have a fear of putting on weight and they don't eat food, and they eat little nibbles of food, and they begin to get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier till it starts to look seriously unhealthy. What do you call that disease? Anorexia. Correct, guys, right? Not anemic, anorexia. And we're going to be discussing that today, right? And anybody knows what OCD is? Someone who suffers from OCD. Any ideas? What does OCD mean? It's a type of mental illness, right? The O stands for obsessive. That's I hope I spell it correct. Compulsive disorder, which I have a bit of myself. Obsessive compulsive disorder is when, I'll give you an example. Whenever I'm leaving the house, right, I have a fear of my house burning down. I will double check, triple check, four check all my plugs, all my heaters, everything. My wife gets really, really annoyed with me with that. Obsessive compulsive disorder means you do something over and over and over, and you can't really reassure, you can't really find the confidence to say, all right, I checked it enough. I'm sure I have nothing to worry about, right? Yes, and there's something called PTSD, which is I can't remember what it stands for, but PTSD is post-stress, it's a stress disorder. Like when people go to war and they fight in wars and they see a whole set of horrible things in wars, when they come back, they can't function because they are traumatized, right? Or it stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. So all of those things are mental illnesses. And what about the other one I was discussing? Socializing, right? Maybe Tommy doesn't like to socialize with people. Maybe Jibby is its only friend, right? And in the exam, they could probably ask you, like how they could ask you for types of mental illnesses. You want to be able to quote about 2 or 3 for the examiner. So out of these 5 here, you can what? Just memorize any 3 out of those 5. And if they ask you why, for reasons why a person might have a kind of social disorder, like why they might not want to socialize with other people, just they might ask you for only 2 reasons. Maybe they were bullied when they were younger. Maybe they had overprotective parents who didn't want them to talk to anybody else, so they grow up thinking it's wrong to talk to other people. Or maybe something really embarrassing happened to them in public and they just don't want to show their face in public or talk to anybody about it, right? Remember, we're not taking notes today, right? Guys, I'm going to ask you all to please come on time in class, right? Class starts at 9 a.m., all right? So I will upload all the notes as usual. All right, so let's move on. Everyone clear so far? Everyone okay so far? This is straightforward. I'm just asking. All right. So let's go through some definitions because in the exam, right, they might ask you for some definitions just for 1 mark or 2 marks, but it's still marks. If they ask you what is health, you can't just, and I've seen people actually do this in an exam, right? If I ask you to define health, some people write, health is when you are feeling good, or health is when you are healthy. I am not joking. Those are legit answers that I've seen students put on paper. Obviously, you're not going to get any marks for that, right? You have to memorize this. Health is defined as a state of complete, and look at it, it's not only physical they're talking about, it's the complete physical, mental, and social. You have to complete all 3 categories, pass all 3 categories to be classified as healthy. Well-being and merely the absence, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. In case you don't know what infirmity is, that's a big word for this. Physical or mental weakness. So if you have an infirmity, that means you're mentally or physically weak in some way, right? To be healthy, you can't have any of that. And then sometimes for 1 mark or 2 marks, they ask you for what? For a definition of disease. Now, a lot of people think disease means germs. I grew up thinking that for a big portion of my life before I started to study and whatnot. Whenever you hear the word disease, you think germs, virus, or bacteria. But that is not true. Disease is defined as an abnormal condition or disorder, meaning that a disease could be mental, right? PTSD, OCD, all of those things are classified as diseases. And those things, OCD, me checking my electrical outlets and gas tanks and whatnot 5, 6 times before I leave the house. That has nothing to do with what? Germs or a virus. That has to do with, I have a mental problem, right? That I probably need to take care of, but probably never will, right? So disease is defined as an abnormal condition or disorder of a structure or function of the body or mind. Key word here, mind. Manifested by characteristic signs and symptoms. Let me just explain what this means. Characteristic symptoms and signs. That means all diseases you must have a certain way to identify it. And once you see those things, you know the person has that particular disease. For example, if you see someone vomiting a lot and they have diarrhea and the fever is extremely high, then their disease could be what? It could be something like what? Cholera, right? Or in my case, if you see someone checking something 6 times, 7 times, and still not convinced, maybe they have OCD. So characteristics and signs just means all diseases must have a certain way of identifying it, right? So you think you all can memorize these two definitions for the exam, right? Right, so let's move on, right? All right, so let's see what what nonsense Jibby is up to. Right, so Jimmy goes to visit his niece and nephew, and he says something stupid as usual. Remember, kids, disease cause health issues. Well, I think that's correct. At least Jimmy said something correct, right? Diseases are basically tiny bacteria and viruses, which are the same thing, right? There are so many things wrong with what Jibby is saying in that second sentence, right? Right. You see what I'm circling there, right? He said 2 things wrong there. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised he said more things wrong. First of all, we already know a disease doesn't have to be bacteria or a virus or what you all would call a germ. We already established a disease is way beyond that. It could be mental or it could be social. However, GB is thinking that a bacteria and a virus is the same thing. Can you all, well, we know that a bacteria and a virus is definitely not the same thing. Let me know on the chat. What's the difference between a bacteria and a virus? What's the difference? Right? You don't have to state all the differences. I just want one key difference between the two. Right, so I'm going to draw a bacteria here. Sometimes bacteria look like this when you put them underneath the microscope. And so, some of you all know there are many different types of viruses, right? But I'm just drawing one type of virus. It looks like a kind of alien spider, right? So this here is your bacteria, and this here is how a virus looks on it. Well, some viruses look underneath the microscope, okay? First of all, a bacteria is considered by science to be alive, right? We are alive. Bacteria are alive. Plants are considered by alive. A virus, even though a virus could move and do plenty things, it's not considered alive. By scientific terms, a virus is not considered a living organism. I know it's strange, but think about it. It's not really that strange. Not because something can move and do complex things means it's alive. Is a robot alive? No, a robot could move, a robot could dance, a robot could spin in a circle, it could probably do a handstand. But by scientific terms, is a robot alive? No. And a virus is on similar grounds with a robot. Okay, great. The other thing is this. A bacteria can live outside your body. So if a bacteria leaves your body and he's just floating in the air, he could live. You have no problem. The bacteria really doesn't need you, you know. The bacteria is independent. He could live on a leaf. He could live in the air. He don't have to be inside of you to live. But a virus needs a host. Oh, that's now. It needs a host. Meaning that for a virus to live, it has to be on you or inside of you. The virus actually lives off of you, you know, it feeds off of you. So if a virus leaves your body for too long, it will not survive, right? It will deteriorate. It won't be there again. Okay. So there's just two examples of the difference between a virus and a bacteria from last term. So that's just an excuse for me to do what? To review it, right? Right. Now, don't get me wrong, right? If a virus could, I'm using this word lightly, could survive for a small amount of time outside the body, right? Like COVID, right? Remember, COVID, if someone were to sneeze, right? So when someone sneezes, it transfers what? The virus. What I'm talking about here, a virus can spread diseases from outside the body, but it's not going to survive outside the body for too long, right? So a virus could still spread diseases temporarily while it's outside the body, right? So let's move on there, right? Right. Now, there are two categories of diseases, right? It have two scary looking words over here, right? Communicable. I'm tight tongue for those who don't know me, right? When the words are too big, my tongue does its own thing, right? So communicable. I have to say it slow, right? When you have a disease, now remember, a disease could be germs, it could be a virus, it could be mental, it could be social. The point is, when you are classifying a disease, it falls into two broad categories: communicable or the opposite, non-communicable. Communicable means it can be spread from one person to another. Tell me something. Well, we all know about this one. The second one is the one everyone should be very, very, very familiar with. COVID-19. If I have COVID-19 and I come next to you and I stand up next to you and start to cough and whatnot, right? Could you possibly get COVID-19? Yes or no? Yes, right? And everybody's shouting out the answer here on the chat, right? Yes, right? You can get COVID-19. So COVID-19 can be spread from one person to another, right? So I have a social responsibility. Yeah, if I have what? COVID, I should probably what? Stay away from you because I don't want you to get it, right? Malaria also, if I guess for those who don't know, I give you the basics in malaria. Malaria usually comes from mosquitoes, right? And if a person has malaria, he can spread it to another person, right? And of course, HIV, well, that's an STD, right? That can be spread from one person to the other. So communicable diseases, and you'll get some definitions after, can be spread from one person to another person by standing too close or physical contact or something. It can be spread, right? Right? Dengue also comes from mosquitoes as well. Non-communicable diseases are diseases that cannot be spread from one person to another by just standing next to them, or if you hug somebody, or whatnot, or you can't spread that particular disease. Look at all of these things. Cancer. If I have cancer and I stand up next to you, right? Or I shake your hand, will you get cancer? No, we all know that doesn't happen. I put stroke here, but it's supposed to be stroke, right? STR. Maybe I was having a stroke when I was trying to write that word. Who knows, right? If I have a stroke and I stand up next to you, you're not going to get a stroke, right? It's not transferable. Of course, you all may not know what sickle cell disease is, and you all may not know what scurvy is, but I will discuss it just now for you because it gives me an excuse to revise some things. Sickle cell disease and scurvy are not communicable. You can't get it if I have it. Let's start off with scurvy. Tell me how we get scurvy, and probably just a brief description of what you think scurvy is. No Googling, guys, no AI chats, off the top of your head. Or if you have a textbook, that's the only assistance I would deem good, right? Whenever you come into class, if you have to research anything, only use your textbooks, not the internet, right? You all know this thing called vitamin C, all right? So a lot of people associate vitamin C, like when you're sick, like whenever you get a cough or a cold, the first thing you just do is run to something that have vitamin C, like oranges and apples and whatnot. Now, don't get me wrong, right? Vitamin C plays an important role in health. But a lot of people don't actually know that one of the biggest things that vitamin C does, it helps take care of your tissues, right? So whenever a person doesn't get enough vitamin C, when they don't have access to fruits, their tissues begin to deteriorate, especially, and one of the first places you see it is in your mouth, your gums. Its tissue begins to deteriorate because you don't have any vitamin C. So then your gums begin to bleed because of the lack of vitamin C. And after your gums get blistered and you're bleeding, your teeth and whatnot start to fall out. And of course, it leads to a very, very slow, painful death. So that brings us back to pirates. Why did pirates get scurvy? Because when you're on a boat for months and it have no fruits, remember, there's only so much food you could stock on a boat. And if you stock oranges or apples and it months on a boat, you think it's gonna be good after a few weeks? No. So pirates didn't have good access to to citrus fruits or things that had plenty of vitamin C. So they developed scurvy and a lot of them died because of it. So that's a little short history of what scurvy is. But what about the one above that? Sickle cell disease. Let's talk about this. Do you all know what a sickle is? Like, you ever went, well, I don't think we have plenty of it in Trinidad, but farmers in like, probably in Russia and Ukraine and even China, you all ever saw something looking, or India, you all ever saw something like this? It's a blade, a curved blade like this, and it has a long handle. And this blade is real sharp, and they use it to cut like tall grass. This here is the sickle, that shape there, right? It have a next name, the scythe, right? You just see, you know who just hold it? Death. You ever see how Death just look? He just have something in his hand. The point is, the word sickle cell disease comes from this particular shape, a blade of this shape, a kind of curved shape, right? So, have you all ever seen red blood cells? Red blood cells are circular, right? And have a kind of impression in the middle. Blood cells are supposed to be round. And anybody remembers what is one of the main purposes of red blood cells? Well, what's one of the main purposes of red blood cells in your body? See if you can remember from last term. What is one of the major things red blood cells do? Neola, correct. Asia, somebody had a correct. Eli, correct, right? Somebody else had a correct. Zaria, correct. Navid, correct, right? Malachi, correct. Red blood cells help the body transport oxygen around your body. When your blood is flowing through your body, it's carrying the red blood cells, and trapped in the red blood cells are the oxygen. So red blood cells help transfer oxygen, which we need for respiration, which we need for energy. So if all your red blood cells are good and they're being transported around your body is able to perform respiration properly, which means you have plenty energy. You don't feel tired or fatigued. But some people, right, unfortunately, their red blood cells don't have a wrong shape. They're shaped like this, or they're shaped like that. And when your red blood cells are not properly shaped and they're smaller in area. Now remember, the one on top how it's bigger and rounder, will hold more oxygen. Sickle cells, when it have this shape, have a smaller area and it cannot transport as much oxygen. Therefore, your oxygen supply is less, which means respiration is less, which means energy is less. Okay? So people with sickle cell disease usually don't have plenty energy. They're always tired. They don't want to go nowhere. They don't feel like playing sports and stuff like that. Okay? So the bottom line is here, communicable diseases can be spread from one person to another, but non-communicable disease, you cannot spread it from one person to another. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it again, communicable and non-communicable, and on the next slide. Right. Right. So here's what I want you to do, right? Everything with this symbol here is communicable, right? There are 3 categories of non-communicable. You see, everything with this symbol is not communicable. Give it a read and let me know if it makes some sense. Just take a 2-3 minutes, and when you finish, I will talk about it, because it may have some terms you don't understand, but I summarize it. Let me know when you're finished. All right, so let's Jibby Nut to the rescue again as usual. So Jimmy goes to see his grandfather, and his grandfather says, "Hey, Jimmy, do you know the signs, keyword here, signs of a heart attack?" And of course, Jimmy, talking nonsense, says, "Sure thing, Gramps. Signs of a heart attack are chest pain, nausea, fatigue, dizziness." How much of you think that is at least fairly correct? That if a person is getting a heart attack, they're going to get some chest pain, some nausea. That's when you feel disoriented and whatnot. You start to feel tired, dizziness. How much you all think? I mean, not everything Jibby had to say is wrong, right? I mean, he's dim-witted, but he must at least get something correct, right? And I think some people seen through my attempt to trick them here. All right. You see, a lot of people mix up these 2 words, signs and symptoms. You might think signs and symptoms are the same thing. If somebody, I mean, and like I said, when I was in school, you tell me signs and symptoms, I'm gonna say, well, signs and symptoms, same thing, right? Who cares, right? But then I began to study, right? I didn't really begin to study too much in school. It's only after I left school then I began to study properly, right? For some reason, when I had the opportunity to study and I wasn't under pressure, like I was outside school, That was the only time I actually enjoyed studying, and I picked up the most amount of work. Ironically, after school, I learned the most, the most, right? Ironically, right? So, and then I realized, wait, nah, sign and symptoms not the same thing, right? And when a doctor is talking to you and he asks you for signs or symptoms, you need to know the difference between the two to communicate with him properly, right? You see, signs, and his grandfather was talking about signs. He didn't use the word symptoms. Gram says signs. Signs can be directly measured or recorded. Like you can get a piece of instrument and measure it. Do you know any instrument that can measure the amount of chest pain the grandfather is feeling? Do you all know any instrument like that? I don't know anything. When you ask somebody how much pain they have, the most they could say, boy, real pain, boy, oh God, it hurting. But that is not a direct measurement. You don't have a value on that. Nausea, that's when a person is feeling upset and disoriented. I mean, you could create a scale and say, hey, well, what's your pain from 1 to 10? But that's not something official. That's just a scale you make up. And how you know, and remember, what one person might consider a lot of pain, another person might say, well, that's not a lot of pain because pain, different people have different amount of tolerance to pain, right? Okay. So things like how tired you are. There isn't an instrument that you could give the person and measure how tired they are. And dizziness. There's nothing to measure the amount of dizziness. So the point is, everything that GB is saying here is not science. He is describing symptoms, okay? Symptoms cannot be directly measured or recorded. So I just put in a little arrow here. Everything that GB just said here is a symptom, right? They are not signs, okay? They are not signs, okay? Great. So give me some example of things that might be signs. Give me an example. Let me say I go to the doctor. What could be considered a sign? Something that could be directly measured. You'd have an instrument to measure it. There's a couple examples. Well, some people said fever, but when they say fever, you mean the temperature of the fever, right? The fever is one thing, but the temperature of the fever is the sign because the temperature is what you're measuring. Blood pressure, that is a good one. There's a machine to measure blood pressure, right? Your pulse, right? A pulse machine, right? Right? A A1, for those who don't know what a A1C test is, that's what you measure your sugar with, right? Right. So some of you all know a lot of examples of signs, things that can be directly measured, right? So don't worry, the next slide going to have proper examples of each one. So let's move on. So and I know what's going to happen. You're going to leave class today and you will know the difference between signs and symptoms right now. But I'm sure if I ask you next week, you might forget which one is which one, right? I think everyone is guilty of that, right? Just remember the signs, the smaller word, even though it's smaller, he is the more important one. He is the one that can be directly measured. So the smaller one, signs, is the one that can be measured directly. He's the more important one. Okay, let's move. Right. Give everything a read here and let me know if everything that I just spoke about, if I put it in an understandable form, right? Just don't pretend you're a reader. Ready, read it and give me some feedback. To be fair, right? Sign of fever, right? When they say the fever, they already mean the temperature, upper TEMP for temperature, right? It's really the temperature of the fever they're talking about. And somebody asks about an abnormal heartbeat. Well, I know you're probably too young to go and take heart. I say I doubt you always go to the doctor's office to monitor your heart and whatnot. But there's a machine called an ECG machine that you can connect to yourself, right? There's connect a whole set of wires to your body, and they will measure your heartbeat, and it is actually plot a graph for you. So you're directly measuring it, right? So your heartbeat can be directly measured. Now, if your heart is not beating properly, well, it could lead to a lot of problems. They call it an abnormal heart song or abnormal heart beat, right? If your heart is not beating properly, like on time, like even missing a beat and thing, well, they could lead to things like what? High blood pressure, sometimes low blood pressure. Some cases, because your heart not beating properly, it could lead to blood not being delivered properly to your brain, and you could get a stroke. So an abnormal heartbeat doesn't only lead to one thing. Depending on the type of abnormal heartbeat, it could lead to different things. Okay? Right. Right, and some people have, well, let's move on. Let's see what's going on here. All right, so there isn't anything, you don't have to read this. This is just the difference between signs and symptoms. I don't know why I have that slide there. We already spoke about that. All right, so the next thing that we are going to talk about, right? Something called inflammation. Oh God, this is a word here that's so overused in advertisements. Like when you're watching an advertisement for a new type of medication, they like to overuse the word inflammation. And what the word inflammation, um, the word inflammation, when people hear it, they usually associate it with any kind of burning on the skin. If your skin burning, people say, oh God, you have inflammation. If you see part of your body swell, they say, oh God, you have inflammation. It's just a word that is used over and over and over. And I realize that a lot of people have no idea what inflammation is. Not everything that's swelling your body or itching on your body, not everything is inflammation, right? And so let's talk about what inflammation is. Now, inflammation can actually be a good thing. How much of you all know that? Inflammation can actually be something good. Let me know in the chat there. Inflammation. Because the reason I have to say that inflammation could be good, right? Is because inflammation is always associated with something bad. So let's talk about it. The key is this: too much of anything is bad. So a little bit of inflammation is actually good, but too much inflammation for too long is actually bad. It's like water. The right amount of water to drink is good. But if you're drinking too much water, like a barrel of water today, like a cow, right? That's not good, right? So the too much of any good thing could end up being what? A bad thing, right? So let's see what's behind the question mark here, right? Let's talk about, before you read that there, let's talk about white blood cells. And this is from last term. Remember, white blood cells are your body's defense. They protect the body against infections and, well, mostly infections and diseases. So let's say that this person here is sick. Let's give her a name. Let's call her Suzanne, right? So Suzanne is sick. So let's say she has a throat infection, right? Whatever, right? She has a throat infection. Doesn't this mean that if this area is being attacked by germs or bacteria or a virus, doesn't this area need some help, right? Doesn't that area need some help? It's like this. I live in Kunupir. So let's say that in Kunupir, there's an attack. Let's say aliens begin to attack us in Kunupir. So all the Kunupirians like myself are screaming up the top of our lungs, right? We screaming for help. won't the country deploy the army to Cunupia to help us out? Because in Cunupia, we need help. So we need our defense force to come to Cunupia to help us out, to help their fellow Cunupiarians, okay? The same thing over here. If over here is being attacked by viruses, then your white blood cells need to go through your blood system, go through your arteries, and all the white blood cells will go to this area, and then a big war will happen. There will be a big war between the white blood cells and the viruses, okay? So what do you think is going to happen in that area? Is it common sense to think that this area will swell? Why is it swelling? Because all the white blood cells are going to that area to help out. They might have plenty white blood cells in that area, so that plenty will cause that area to swell. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? What do you all think? Is that swelling a good thing or a bad thing? That's a good thing. That means, hey, when you see your body starts to swell, like you're sick, and an area of your body begins to swell, you should give it a thumbs up because that's your white blood cells working, fighting the war for you in that area. The problem is, when does inflammation become a problem? By the way, that swelling and the white blood cells going to that area is called inflammation. The problem is the war should not last too long. The swelling should just be for about 2-3 days, right? 1 second, guys. I said to answer my phone. Just give me 1 second. All right. So the problem is, well, when this swelling happens, right? Well, when this swelling happens, you don't want this swelling to stay for too long. Like you don't want it to be there for 5 days or 7 days or even a month, because when this swelling happens for too long, it begins to not, it goes from helping the area to damaging the area. All right, so I hope that clears up that inflammation is good for a certain amount of time, but when it goes on for too long, it actually damages the area by mistake. Not by mistake, it just damages the area. Okay. And by the way, that's off the top of the question, right? What are the 2 types of blood cells? Well, what are the 2 categories of blood cells that can be of white blood cells that can be found in the human body? Now, and let's clear it up for those who are a little new. Remember, white blood cells help fight diseases. But what I'm asking is, what are the 2 categories of white blood cells found in the body? 2 categories of white blood cells. One starts with L and one starts with P, right? It's lymphocytes and phagocytes. Okay? Those are the 2 categories of white blood cells. Okay? Quick question. Which one runs up to the bacteria? Which one is like the caveman? Like, if it have a disease, the white blood cell will just run up to it and eat it. Just get rid of the disease. Which one is like the caveman, right? It just attacks the diseases. It fights it. It gets into hand-to-hand combat with the disease, right? No, it's not the lymphocytes. It's the phagocytes. The phagocytes are like the caveman. Last time I was explaining it like that, I believe, right? The lymphocytes are the sophisticated ones, right? The geniuses, right? The lymphocytes, when it have a bacteria, the lymphocytes will go up to it. It won't engage in fighting. The lymphocytes don't fight like that with their hands and things. It will go up to the disease. It will investigate it and then figure out its weaknesses. And once the lymphocyte figures out the disease weaknesses, it is create a poison for it and give the poison to the disease. right? So the lymphocytes are the sophisticated ones. They don't fight hand-to-hand combat. They fight with their brains, okay? The phagocytes, they just run up to the disease and start to beat it and eat it, right? So, and you know, and by the way, one is not better than the other, right? I just letting you know your body needs both of them, okay? Great. Next question. Which part of your body creates the white blood cells, well, the majority of your white blood cells? Which part of your body? Let's say if you all can get this for 2 marks in the exam. What part of you, and I mentioned it last term, it was one of almost the last things we did last term, right? Which part of your body creates the white blood cells? Daniel, correct, right? Neola, correct. Zaria, correct. It's your bone marrow. Your bone marrow, right? In case you don't know what your bone marrow is, it's inside, it's in the middle of your bones, right? There's this structure called your bone marrow that creates the white blood cells. So whenever you hear someone needs a bone marrow transplant, which is a very popular thing that a lot of people need, right? It's because their bone marrow is damaged somehow and it cannot produce white blood cells, which is really, really scary. Because if your body cannot produce white blood cells, it cannot protect its body from any diseases. And you can imagine the kind of death associated with that, right? That's a very traumatic, painful death, right? So let's move on, right? Right. So let me see what this slide is about. Asthma. Anybody here suffering from asthma? Right? I have a slight case of asthma. And not asthma, sorry, bronchitis, not asthma. Sorry, I mixed it up. I have a slight case of bronchitis. But does anybody here suffer from asthma? Somebody said they used to, right? Andrew, you have asthma, right? Somebody said they were born with it. The bone marrow is located inside your bones, like in the middle of your bones, right? It's inside your bones itself, right? So asthma, right? Somebody's, I didn't know so much people in this class had asthma, right? But so I sure you all know, for the people who have asthma, I sure you know a lot more about asthma than me because you're living with it, right? So I'm sure you know a lot. So let's go through this slide here. And unfortunately, asthma is like a real big part of the syllabus. So you see questions like these, you see things on diabetes and asthma, your teacher is not going to be able to help themselves to bring questions. They love to bring questions on these things. So asthma is a chronic respiratory disease. That means it and the word in here suggests it affects your breathing. When somebody has an asthma attack, they cannot breathe in properly. I will explain why they have breathing problems in a little while, right? And it's caused by the inflammation and narrowing of the airways. Now, this is a case where I use the word inflammation. Now, remember, I said that inflammation could be a good thing or a bad thing. In this case here, the inflammation we're talking about is the bad type, where there's too much inflammation. And we all know by now, inflammation causes what? Swelling. So we're going to see how that swelling is a bad thing in a little while. Now, the truth is, doctors don't completely understand asthma as yet, right? Which is kind of scary, right? Because they're still trying to figure out exactly where asthma comes from, exactly what triggers it, and how to cure it. These things are not ready as yet, unfortunately, in our time, right? So the main causes of asthma are not completely understood, but it is believed to be a combination of genetic and environmental factors. Now, let me explain something about asthma. A person could have asthma and not know it. It's dormant in their body. So somebody could grow up to be what there's 16 years, 18 years, and they never had an asthma attack, but they have asthma. It's just it hasn't been revealed as yet. Nothing didn't trigger it as yet. Okay? So, what can possibly trigger an asthma attack? Well, they made a little list here, right? So doctors say things like infections, allergies, air pollution, and certain medicines, right? Like ibuprofen and aspirin and emotions. Sometimes a person normal and they have asthma, they're looking normal, and something traumatic happens to them. Maybe they get really angry or really depressed, or something happens and it triggers the asthma, right? So in the exam, the examiner could just ask you, hey, well, what are some possible triggers for asthma? And I have 5 listed there. Just remember about 3, at least 3 for the exam, and you'll be fine. Now, did I use the correct word here? Primary symptoms. Should I have used the word symptoms, or should I have used the word signs? Because they said the symptoms of asthma include shortness of breath, wheezing, chest pain, coughing, right? Should I have used the word signs or symptoms? Yeah, I use the correct word. The correct word is symptoms, right? Because these are things that you really can't measure directly, right? You don't already have a machine to measure your amount of wheezing, right? A wheezing is something that the person will describe to the doctor. It's like a wheezing, right? But you can't say a wheezing 45 or a wheezing 60. There isn't a number ready to put on it. Shortness of breath, there isn't a machine that can put an actual number on those things, right? Right? So these are symptoms, not signs, right? You will know signs. There will be a machine, most likely, that can give you a value on it. Right? So just do me a favor. Just take a minute, read through the slide, make sure you understand it, and let me know when you're finished. Right. So how do we treat asthma, right? So asthma is a chronic respiratory disease characterized by the inflammation or narrowing of the airways. Now, I haven't shown you a diagram of exactly what asthma looks like, but it's on the next slide. But I just want to show you how to treat asthma. For those who have asthma, does anything here look familiar? When you went to the doctor, did they give you any steroids or anything? Or a drug called salbutamol. That's one of the most popular drugs to treat asthma if you're having an asthma attack. And of course, you must avoid things if you know something triggers your asthma. You need to stay away from things that trigger the asthma, right? So highly polluted areas with smoke and you gotta stay away from places like that. They say maintaining a healthy weight and following a healthy diet does work. Getting exercise, and of course, yeah, if you have asthma, you shouldn't be smoking. Obviously, no, but you shouldn't be smoking at all, right? Asthma or not, right? So the asthma puff, for those who have the asthma puff, right? I believe it has this in it, this drug in it, the salbutamol. If you read the puff packaging, you will see it have that drug in it, right? Right, so give it a read. Just take a minute. Just make sure you understand it. It's pretty simple to understand, but you need to memorize this word because in the multiple choice and sometimes in the structured paper, they will ask you, oh, what's the name of the drug that can be used to help with asthma when a person having an asthma attack. Okay. All right. So here's a diagram of how asthma actually affects a person. So, well, when you breathe in, right? So when the person opens their mouth or they breathe in through their nose, the air is supposed to go through here and then go into your lungs. Usually, if these tubes are good, right? You notice this is a cross section, right? The air can flow through very easy. So it's like a piece of pipe, right? And it's what? Very clear. So the air can flow. However, when a person has an asthma attack, look at the difference between this and this. The walls become thicker. Why does it become thicker? Because of inflammation, right? Something triggers that inflammation and the walls get thicker. These walls are of this same tube in here. And also it gets filled with mucus. Do you all think air is going to be able to flow through that properly? Look at the 3D diagrams and look at the cross-sectional diagrams. This one is good, but this one here, the tube becomes almost clogged because of the swelling, because of the inflammation. And to make things worse, you're going to have mucus inside there. That's a really scary, scary situation where you're having trouble what? Breathing. So this is what a person who is having an asthma attack, this is what their airways look like, right? So I made sure I'm putting the 3D diagrams because some of you all may be wondering exactly how it affects the body now. And now you know, okay? And in the exam, when I've seen this come in the exam already in past papers, in the exam, the examiner will draw this diagram. He will say, this is a person who is not having an asthma attack, or everything is good for the time being. And then they will say, redraw this diagram so to show that the person is having what? An asthma attack. They will never ask you to draw the 3D diagrams. They will only ask you to draw these diagrams in the exam. And you have to take this diagram and put in a thick layer and make the wall a little bit thicker and put in the word mucus now in the middle to show that it's being clogged with the mucus as well. And then you'll get it correct in the exam. Let's move on. All right, so what's the time there? 10:21. All right. So let's talk let's refresh your memory here, right? Let's talk. Everyone knows that glucose is important. Anybody wants to tell me what's the name of this equation? When you take glucose in your body, you add oxygen and you get carbon dioxide, water, and energy. What's the name of that equation? Right. Right, so we're going to talk this equation here is the respiration equation. And it's how the body creates what? Energy. The main thing here is this guy called glucose. Glucose is a type of sugar. Now, just to clarify, when you people hear the word sugar, they think about the sugar that it is put in coffee and tea and in chocolates and whatnot. Fine, that is a type of sugar, but there are hundreds of different types of sugar. One of them is glucose. You see, when you eat food, things that are high in carbohydrates, like roti, but anything with flour, potatoes, cassava, anything starchy, when you eat it, your digestive system will break down those carbohydrates into something called glucose, okay? Now, without glucose, your body is going to have a very, very difficult time making what? Energy. So technically, glucose is good. But obviously, I mention this over and over. Too much of something or too little bit of a something is a problem. Your body must have the right amount of glucose. Now, I'm going to use a color here, right? I'm going to use black. This here is supposed to be a blood vessel. So the blood is running next to a cell. I'm going to put some black dots here. These black dots are going to represent what? Glucose, right? Where does the glucose belong? Does the glucose belong in the artery, in the blood vessel? Or does the glucose belong inside of the cell? Where does the glucose belong? At the end of the day, where does he belong? Right, the glucose, which is the black dots, belong inside the cell because the glucose needs to go inside here, right? So it will go inside of the cell because remember, the red blood cell is pressing on so it will go across, I believe, by diffusion. It will diffuse into the cells, right? Which part of the cell is going to use the glucose? So let me say the glucose goes inside of the cell. So you see the arrows going inside of the cell. Which part of the cell needs the glucose? It starts with the letter M. Take a guess. Starts with the letter M. And it's this guy here. All right. I need more space there. Mitochondria. Right? You all know this from last term, right? The A missing here, right? So it's the mitochondria. That is where respiration takes place, right? Now, here's the thing. The glucose, fine, the glucose is allowed to be inside the blood vessels, but eventually the glucose has to make sure it goes inside the cell. The glucose not supposed to stay inside the blood vessels for too long. You know why? Whenever you have too much glucose inside your blood vessels, it is start to damage the blood vessels. And that's going to be a problem. Glucose is supposed to end up inside your cells. So here's the problem now. Let's say the cell has enough glucose. So the cell says, they might have glucose outside here and a lot of them going inside the cell. But then the cell says, whoa, 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 I'm full, partner. I cannot accept any more glucose. Isn't this person most likely eating too much sugary stuff? Maybe that person ate, well, what's your favorite chocolate bar? Let me just get one. Let me get an idea. Well, which chocolate bar you cannot resist when you go into the grocery? What chocolate bar you can't resist? Most people say, what, Hershey's? That's too expensive for me. A Charles X bar, God, you know, long me eat that. A dairy. For me, it's always a Cocoa Crisp. I love Cocoa Crisp, right? You give me 10 Cocoa Crisps, I eat all 10, right? So let me say a person eating a Hershey's. So they're eating Hershey's after Hershey's after Hershey's, and your parents telling you, hey, stop eating so much Hershey's, and you don't care. That person is going to end up with too much sugar in their bloodstream. And what's going to happen? All the cells are going to get filled. And eventually your cells are going to say, whoa, 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 partner, I can't handle no more glucose. What do you think your body is going to do with all that extra glucose? It cannot leave it in the blood because if it leave all that extra glucose in the blood, it's going to start, that's dangerous. It's going to start damaging your blood cells. So your body has a backup plan, right? Your body has this part here. It's behind your stomach, right? It's this little green thing here, right? I don't think I have it labeled. That's your pancreas. Your pancreas, well, that's the word here, creates a hormone called insulin. What your body will do, the pancreas will say, hey, the body will send a signal to the pancreas. The body will say, hey, Mr. Pancreas, we have too much sugar in our blood, too much glucose, we need help. So the pancreas will say, no problem, partner, right? And he will make something called insulin. And then he will send the insulin to the body, right? What insulin will do, it will take the extra glucose in your body, right? And it will convert it to something called glycogen. And once it converted to glycogen, it will take it out of the blood and put it in the liver. So it will store the extra glucose in the liver. But it is stored in something in a form called glycogen. Now I know that's a lot to take in, so let me say back hopefully in a slightly different way. When your body has too much glucose in its bloodstream, which is dangerous, the body has a backup plan, right? The pancreas makes a hormone called insulin. What does insulin do? Insulin goes to all the glucose, the extra glucose, and converts it into something called glycogen. And then it will take that glycogen, take it out of the blood, and put it in the liver. So the liver stores the glycogen. But the main point is the extra glucose is out of the blood. And that's the main thing. So this is where diabetes is a problem, right? We'll reach diabetes next week, but I just want to give you an introduction. Tell me something. If the body was not able to produce insulin, do you think that's going to lead to a problem? Let's say a pancreas cannot make insulin or cannot make enough insulin. What's going to happen? It's going to lead to a problem, right? Because if the body cannot make the insulin, who is going to convert or tell the body to convert the glucose to glycogen to put it in the liver? But there are two problems, right? There are two ways the problem can happen. In some people, the body cannot produce insulin. The pancreas is damaged. It cannot produce the insulin. So that's going to lead to what? To a big problem, too much glucose in the blood. And here's another thing, right? Sometimes your pancreas can make insulin. The pancreas making insulin, the pancreas good enough, right? But the body stops listening to the insulin. You know, sometimes your parents talking, they tell you, hey, do your homework, or do something, and you don't listen. No matter how much they quarrel with you, you don't listen. So you call that resistance. Insulin resistance is when your body, even though it's making the correct amount of insulin, your body stops listening to the insulin. So if your body stops listening to the insulin, it's never going to convert the extra glucose to glycogen to put in your liver, which leads to the two types of diabetes, right? Let's go to the next slide here, right? Right. So this here is just explaining what a hormone, this is just saying exactly what I just said here, right? Just give everything a read. Insulin is a hormone created by the pancreas. And what does the insulin do? It takes the excess glucose and convert it into glycogen to move it out of the bloodstream into the liver because you don't want it in your bloodstream. Let's give it a quick read at a half. All right, so before we move on, right? What's the time there? Oh, guys, well, care what? We'll end off on this slide here. We'll go to this slide because we're almost at the end of class there, right? So next week, right, what we're going to do, and for those who are brand new to the class, first of all, and want to know how to get all the notes from last term and everything you missed, stay back, I will explain it to you. But the point is, next week, right, we're going to move. I want to start off class with basically with diabetes and have a real thorough discussion on what is diabetes, what can lead to diabetes, and how we treat it. Okay? So guys, for those who were here last term and you know how to get all the notes and whatnot, and you're free to leave, right? For the brand new students, stay back now, and I will explain how to get the notes and whatnot.